All right, good morning, everyone. So, back out on our site after a beautiful weekend. So it's kind of funny. Joey, good Lord, that kid's a freaking tank. So he shows up this morning, obviously just sick as hell. Like, man, what'd you show up for? Why'd you go home? Man, I always show up. Just go home, dude. Go home. You're sick. So it's just gonna be me and Blaine today. Hopefully Joey's feeling better tomorrow. So I'm waiting for Blaine to show up. I am gonna fire up the Mini X and just keep backfilling here a little bit, and then we're just gonna build and backfill. If anyone's looking for a recommendation on some pruners, these would be the ones right here. The Felcos. Well, these are the Felco 2s. The Felco 3s are freaking sweet too. They'll last forever. They're a little bit more expensive, but holy crap, my dad gave me these when I was like 9. Another thing to be aware of, you're packing, if you're using one of these smaller plate packers, this is a 250 pound plate packer, and you'll see me and Blaine doing really short lifts, about 2.5 to 3 inches, and that's because it'll only, so say we did like a 4-inch lift, it's not going to pack that whole 4 inches. It'll just pack the top bit, and it will reach a point where it won't pack anymore, and it will be, top couple inches that are packed, and the bottom couple inches won't be packed. So that's why we're doing it in shorter lifts. It takes a little bit longer, but you're getting an actual complete compaction, especially if you're using a 250 pound plate packer. If we're using, one of the big boys, we could do it at 5-6 inch lifts, but small packer, small lifts. That's all you gotta remember.
So here's a fun one that even the engineers can't explain to me. You're technically not supposed to compact within 3 feet of the backside of a retaining wall, except your drainage zone is only supposed to be 12 inches behind the retaining wall. So that means technically you're supposed to have 2 feet of uncontrolled fill going in behind your retaining wall. No way. If you don't pack that 2 foot that goes behind the drainage zone, you're going to have problems. And so we always compacted, and when I've questioned the engineers, they've never yet come up with a good solution. And speaking of engineers, if you are going to build an engineered retaining wall, you can't just get any old civil engineer. I'm going to recommend you get somebody that not only understands retaining wall construction, but also has specialty programs designed to help you build that retaining wall, meaning that there is CAD-aided designs that will allow an engineer to design the specific grid lengths for the retaining wall. Here's where it gets interesting. Even though you got a 6 foot, let's say you got a 6 foot retaining wall, not all of your grid lengths behind that retaining wall are going to be equal distant or equal length behind the retaining wall. It'll depend on the surcharge, and the surcharge means the load that is placed behind the retaining wall. And typically, the surcharge is going to come from 2 different forms or functions. One is going to be a hill, the other one is going to be a structure. And then the grid lengths are dependent on the height of the retaining wall, the type of soil that is going behind the retaining wall. That's a critical element to make sure you have a soil sample, and then the surcharge that the retaining wall is going to experience. All of these 3 things tie together to actually make a properly engineered retaining wall. And that's why I back up to say you don't want just any old civil engineer. You want to make sure you get somebody that understands retaining wall construction, because you as the installer, no matter what happens, if you screw that wall up, you're liable for it for 8 years. That's right. If they find a fault in, you don't even have to give a warranty. If it's legally you find a fault in your retaining wall, you as the installer pay that bill for 8 years. So you best do it right.
All right, we're gonna be playing every landscaper's favorite sport today, which is race the rain. So we're just gonna get as much stacked as we can and as much backfilled as we can before the rain hits. Oh, they always get caught in the grid. Every grid layer, they get caught in the grid. I got to cut one for this next course. And then I think I got one more on top of that. Then one more on top of that. And then caps.
Now, one of the things that always looks off that I need to explain to you is that grid that you just seen there that looked all higgledy-piggledy. The wall's here, the grid is flopped down, there's rock under here. And what we learned when we were doing all commercial work was to speed up the building process. What we don't do is lay one course of block down, then backfill it, lay one course of block down, then backfill it, lay one course of block down, backfill it. That's just too tedious and time consuming to keep switching gears back and forth. But we do is, I did say do, we put 4 courses of block up. And the reason we put 4 courses of block up is because that is where your grid spacing is always in a retaining wall. So that we always have a one layer of geogrid that we're backfilling either up to or over the top of. And what we do with that geogrid is if we're backfilling up to it is we flip it up over the face of the wall. We get everything nice and level to where that grid stops. Then we slap that down onto the dirt, and then we can keep backfilling up to the back of that top block. But by being able to strategically and carefully put 4 courses up, we also realized that we were able to speed up the building process, which is not as critical in a residential retaining wall, but it's hyper critical in a commercial retaining wall. And so a lot of the tips and tricks and techniques that we use that you see in these videos were actually pulled off from when we were building massive commercial sites, and we had to keep up with the Joneses basically to be able to land the bits.
All right, scuffing these blocks up, very important part of building a wall. Stan can explain more about that. It's just like they get, I guess you could call it like an overcast on the top where like the channels are and stuff. And it's not very much, but it's enough to throw your wall off. Especially, say you're doing like an 11-foot wall and your base blocks didn't get scuffed off. By the time you get to that point on top of your wall, that's going to cause some big problems for you. Stan can explain more about that. It's just a very important step, I should just say.
So it's the story of the princess and the pea. Basically meaning that a little teeny tiny imperfection at the bottom of the retaining wall can turn into a really big deal when it gets to the top of the retaining wall. So you've got to be very careful that at the lowest levels of the courses that all of the block tops match up perfectly. And what it's called is slag or overcast during the process of manufacturing. What happens is they get just a little teeny tiny little bit of extra concrete, and if that isn't removed, then that's going to become a major problem down the road. But one of the things you got to be super careful of is when you're building an engineered retaining wall is the grid layers. Because even your grid layers on a tall enough wall can throw it off when you get up high enough. But a lot of times what happens is you put a grid down on the top of a block, and then you get a little rock trapped between the grid and the block. And even that can make your block rock, or can throw off the top. So you've got to be hypercritical of everything that happens at the lowest courses. Once you get up to the top of the courses, you can actually be a little bit more forgiving. I don't recommend it because then you get into a bad habit. I recommend remaining hypercritical throughout the entire process, because that becomes just a habit that goes right from the beginning of the retaining wall to the end of the retaining wall. But let's play worst case scenario and you miss something and it's close to the top. Well, there's only one course going on top of the spot you missed. You might not see it, and if it's not structural, well, then it just becomes an issue of aesthetics. But if you're hypercritical throughout the whole process, you don't got nothing to worry about anyway.
So this one right here, the face is fine. The face is all good. We got this big like air pocket or something like this. And now if this was, you know, back here a little bit, that'd be fine. We'd use it. We could put it in the front of the wall. But with the step back on here, the next block on top of it will be sitting right here. And you will be able to see that plain as day in the wall. So we're going to use that as a cut because this is the side I need. We got our cut. Get that up on there. Stack out another course. And then we only got one more to go. Oh, I keep forgetting, but I've seen some of you guys asking about this mask. It just has the replaceable filters in it, and it looks a whole lot cooler. And I'd argue that the rule of cool is the most important rule of all. So this one is a base camp one, but they have a whole bunch of different places that are making these. You have to check though, because some of them aren't like the same as an N95, so you'll have to check in the specifications if you get one of these and stuff, because you don't want to end up with just like a dust mask or something like that. Make sure you have one that has like the rubberized nose piece on there, because the one that I was using last year didn't. It was just metal, and like that maybe lasted 2 or 3 weeks before it busted. So make sure you got one of them rubberized ones if you guys pick one of these up. I got some tips for you when you're straightening by yourself, or a trick. I actually have a thing rigged up that like sits in here or whatever that you can loop it onto. Well, I have 2 of them, but I forgot to grab them, of course. But you can do it like this too if you got a block. You know, wrap your string line around there a couple of times, and then grab yourself a pin, because you don't want your string line sitting right on top of your blocks. So you get your pin. And I like to loop it like one more time on there just to have it a little bit more sturdy, and you line it up on the back of your blocks after you make sure after you make sure they're all pushed out. And then you can either do the same thing on the other side, or you can just hold it like I was just holding it, and do it like that. And okay, so obviously we got radius going on, right? And how you straighten those, because you can't pull a string line like you can on the straight run, is first of all, you pound them all forward as far as they will go, and then you just match up the seams. As long as they're all the way forward and the seams matched up, it should look pretty good. Another thing, when you're stacking your rows, this is the time that you absolutely want to, you know, take a little bit of time, make sure you don't have any gaps in the course or anything like that. And I see that all over the places. Be gaps in between the blocks on the courses and stuff like that. And you know, that would put me in the mindset, if I was a homeowner, saving up for a wall, all excited, shelled out a whole bunch of money for it, and I'm looking at it when it's done and there's gaps in between the blocks and all that kind of stuff. That maybe starts getting me thinking, what the hell else, you know, maybe didn't they take the time to do on my wall and stuff like that. So it's just like those tiny little details and stuff like that that you might not think matters, but will, you know, matter to the homeowner and stuff. And it's the same thing, I see this all the time with like the grates and stuff. There's a right way for these, you know. You got your text right there. There's an up and a down on those things. I mean, technically not, they'll work whatever way you put them in, but again, that's something that, you know, people are going to notice.
So one of the important things to do is to straighten each and every course, because it's easier to, a stitch in time saves 9. It's easier to catch it right away before it becomes a problem. And the way we do it on straight runs is we always string line the back side of the wall. And the reason we string line the back side of the wall is because the face is a rough face, and it's rough intentionally to give it that texture. The back side is a machine face, and it allows you to be more precise with your string line. So that's one of the things that we do very consistently. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, but we're not quite done with this project yet. So hit that subscribe button and come back tomorrow, because we're going to wrap it all up. That's all we got for you on this one. God bless. Go get them. We'll see you on the next one.